The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
Where strange lights speed beyond reason across a clear night sky.
The house at the end of the road, where disembodied voices whisper and strange noises make the living shiver.
Lurking shadows hiding on the edge of the woods just outside your back door.
Odd, true events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole. I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. I'm Wes, and that's my wife and co-host, Beth.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Yes, Happy New Year's to all you wanderers out there. Well, Beth, we launched our podcast about 7 months ago, and we've learned quite a bit since then, and we love what we do. So we're excited this year to do some equipment upgrades and continue to grow Where Our Minds Wander. And we want to thank all you fellow wanderers for listening. Please tell your friends and family, and don't forget to rate us on your favorite listening platform and leave us a comment, please. We're not algorithm experts, so I don't know how the algorithms work on, say, Spotify or Apple, but what we've noticed is leaving a comment along with a rating rather than just leaving a rating seems to help us move up more in the podcast charts and become a suggested podcast for people to find us. So ratings and reviews are crucial to podcasts like us to continue to grow. So please take a moment to help us out with a rating and a review if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, please. We appreciate it.
So with all that out of the way, let's see where Beth's mind wandered for this first episode of the new year.
Okay, so back in the late 90s, I was in England on a vacation, and I stayed at a little bed and breakfast, I think in Chichester. And I can't remember the name of the place, but I do remember that it had a lovely little garden, and the whole place was decorated with hedgehogs. There were hundreds of them inside the house. There were little ceramic ones and wooden ones, and they were just everywhere. So while we were there, we called it the Hedgehog House. And I'm pretty sure that's not the name of the place, but I don't even know if it still exists. But anyway, one day I was sitting out in the garden having tea, of course, and there was this elderly lady who just came outside and sat down next to me at the little table. And I was in my early 20s then, so anyone over 65 seemed elderly to me. So I don't know how old she really was, but I thought maybe she was in like her 80s. So anyway, she talked nonstop to me in like these broken thoughts, almost like it was a stream of consciousness kind of talking. And she kept saying over and over that she went to the ball and danced with the prince, and the prince really liked her. And she missed the ball, and she wanted to go back to the ball. And I remember listening really politely, because I didn't want to be rude, but she didn't really seem to want to talk to me. It was more like she just wanted to talk at me. So at the time, like I said, I was young, and I found the whole thing really surreal. And at the time, I thought she was incredibly mysterious, and for some reason, I believed everything she was saying to me. So a little bit later, the owner of the house took me aside and asked me if this lady was bothering me, and I said no. I felt a little sorry for her because she seemed kind of lost. And the lady smiled and she said, yeah, she's a little lost, but don't believe a thing she tells you. So I have no idea who she was or what prince she was talking about or even what country she was referring to. But I did wonder at the time, does she think she's Anastasia? So I've thought about her off and on over the years, wishing I had listened for longer or tried to ask her some sort of questions. But like I said, I was pretty young. And since she made me a little uncomfortable, I was more concerned with being polite than trying to gain more information. So I'm 100% sure that the lady I met in that garden was not Anna Anderson. But Anna's tale is equally fascinating, and luckily, people did ask her a lot of questions. So in 1920, a woman was pulled from a canal in Berlin. The woman had no recollection of who she was or how she had gotten into the canal, and she was taken to Dahldorf Asylum. As doctors and visitors tried to figure out who she might be, Madame Unknown was shown photographs of the Romanov family. Why, I'm not sure. It seems kind of like a strange thing to do, unless Madame Unknown had mentioned them at some point. But apparently, after this man with the photographs left, Madame Unknown told a nurse that she had just seen a photograph of her grandmother. Another patient at the asylum suggested that perhaps Madame Unknown was Tatiana Romanov, and suddenly everyone was paying attention. Now, I think most people over a certain age know who the Romanovs were, but quickly, for those who may not, the Romanovs were the ruling family of Russia for something like 300 years. Catherine the Great was a Romanov. But in 1917, there was the Russian Revolution, and Tsar Nicholas ended up abdicating the throne. He and his family, which included 5 children, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and Alexei, fled to a safe house. At one point, the entire family was brought down into the basement and asked to pose for a seated photograph, but instead of taking their picture, several men shot them.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So, as an interesting aside, I did not know this, but Prince Philip of England was actually a grandnephew of the Romanovs. Did you know that? Because I did not know that.
No, I had no clue about that.
But anyway, for years, there were rumors that the youngest daughter, Anastasia, had escaped the execution. Some said she had escaped the bullets because of precious jewels sewn into her clothes, that the jewels had acted as a sort of bulletproof vest. And since 2 of the Romanov family members' bodies were never found, the rumors seemed to be hopeful truth. But if it was true, where did Anastasia go? Suddenly, Madame Unknown had many visitors, including the man who had brought the initial photographs to show her. The man was Captain Nicholas von Schwab, and he was thoroughly convinced that she was Tatiana, so much so that he encouraged other Russian immigrants to go see her. Zinaida Tolstoy, the wife of the author, went to see her. So did a former lady-in-waiting to Tatiana's mother. Tolstoy left convinced. The lady-in-waiting did not. But Madame Unknown had a reason for why the lady-in-waiting did not think she was Tatiana, because she wasn't. She was actually Anastasia. Madame Unknown began referring to herself as Anna Tchaikovsky, and Anna certainly could be Anastasia. She spoke German with a Russian accent. She had strange scars on her body that could have been from a fire. Schwab and Tolstoy were able to have Anna removed from the asylum and placed with Baron Arthur von Kleist. Kleist was from Russia too, and now lived in Berlin. But since Kleist had been a police chief, some believed he took Anna in because he thought if the old regime was ever reestablished, he'd receive some reward for believing in her. Regardless, Anna was free of the asylum, and after staying with Kleist for a bit, she moved from place to place, staying in the homes of people who believed in her identity. She continued to receive visitors of all kinds, and suddenly there was a who's list of those who believed she was Anastasia and those who did not. On the not side were some pretty credible people. Princess Irene of Hesse, who was the Tsarina's sister, said she didn't recognize Anna. When Anna contracted TB in 1925 and was hospitalized, she was visited by the groom of the chamber, Anastasia's private tutor, the Tsar's sister, and her nursemaid, and all four denied that Anna was Anastasia. On the yes side was Prince Valdemar of Denmark, Anastasia's great-uncle. He financed her convalescence in Lugano in 1926, under the provision that her identity be further investigated. She stayed with an artist named Harriet von Rathleff, who was a huge supporter. But Anna and Rathleff got into some sort of argument, and Anna was moved to a sanatorium outside the Bavarian Alps. It was while she was there that she met with perhaps her biggest supporters, Gleb Botkin and Tatiana Melnik, who had both known Anastasia as a child. The pair's father was Dr. Eugen Botkin, who had been murdered by the Bolsheviks at the same time as Anastasia's family. The siblings firmly believed that Anna was their long-lost friend, saying she looked just like her. Although Melnik agreed that Anna didn't seem to have all of the knowledge of her own family that she probably should have, and that Anna seemed much more childlike than Anastasia would have, Melnik also felt that anyone would have mental blocks and emotional challenges after living through the murder of her entire family and then having to live in hiding for fear of her own safety.
That seems pretty reasonable.
Yes. Valdemar, however, had had enough, and in 1927 he stopped offering Anna his financial support. Next, Anna was shuffled off to yet another Romanov distant relative, Duke George of Leuchtenberg. At this point, Anastasia's uncle, Ernest Louis, the Grand Duke of Hesse, got involved, hiring his own private investigator, Martin Knopf. And here's where Anna's story really started to fall apart. Knopf came to the conclusion that Anna was really a munitions factory worker named Franziska Schankowska. Franziska's husband had been killed during World War I, and shortly after losing him, she went to work and accidentally, or not, dropped a grenade in the factory, killing a foreman.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Accidentally dropped a grenade.
Accidentally.
Wow.
This is when she received the injuries that left scars on her body. Franziska became depressed and was declared insane in 1916. She went in and out of several asylums until her suicide attempt in that canal in Berlin. Reportedly, Franziska's own brother came to see her while she was staying with Duke George. The brother absolutely recognized her and swore she was his sister, but he signed an affidavit saying Franziska bore only a strong physical resemblance to his sister and that she did not recognize him. So it seemed that Anna, for the most part, had been found out. But her story didn't end there. In 1928, Anna, still insisting she was Anastasia, boarded an ocean liner to New York City. She held a press conference aboard, saying Gleb Botkin was paying for her to have jaw surgery in America since the Bolsheviks had broken it during the slaughter of her family. The press went wild, and Anna was met with a new onslaught of supporters and the curious, people who just wanted to meet the lost Romanov daughter. Anna stayed in lavish hotels and was often called Your Highness by both the New York elite and the everyday person. Curiously, she signed one hotel register as Anna Anderson, and suddenly her name had changed once more. But she was still Anastasia, of course. And the press loved her. Movies were made about her, plays were written about her, newspaper articles flew off the newsstands. Many years passed, and Anna maintained through the next 4 decades that she was Anastasia. She never wavered. In 1968, she married an American history professor and emigrated permanently to the United States. So, what would she gain from being Anastasia? Besides the attention and fame, well, she'd inherit money, of course. Lots of money. And Anna did try, but she was never awarded any. Which is probably a good thing, because in 1991, the Romanov family was exhumed from a mass grave. 5 of the 7 bodies were buried there, and mitochondrial DNA testing was done, identifying them as Nicholas, Alexandra, and 3 of their daughters. The testing proved the link between the Romanovs and Prince Philip, but when they compared it to DNA taken during one of Anna's operations years before, it did not match hers. The bodies of Alexei, the Romanov son, and the missing Romanov daughter, presumably Anastasia, were found in 2007. Similar testing proved that they were the last 2 members of the immediate Romanov family. They were related to Prince Philip. They were not related to Anna Anderson. In fact, similar testing was done on one member of Franziska Schankowska's family, her sister's grandson, and it was a match. Not wanting to risk any contention, strands of Anna's hair that her husband had kept in an envelope were also tested. The hair did not match any DNA of the Romanov family or Prince Philip, but it did match Franziska Schankowska's family.
I love DNA testing.
So the story was finally ended. Anna Tchaikovsky Anderson was not Anastasia Romanov. But the question, of course, still remains because, questions always do. Why did she believe that she was? Or did she? Hey, did you know? We missed First Foot Day, a Scottish tradition where the first person to enter your house on the new year brings good fortune and gifts, and Fruitcake Toss Day. But what other national holidays are coming up this month? Here's a few. January 7th, National Old Rock Day. The stone variety, not the music genre. So go out there and appreciate those old stones. January 9th, National Static Electricity Day. January 16th, National Nothing Day. That's right, a day when we are supposed to do absolutely nothing, which is quite hard, frankly. January 20th, Penguin Awareness Day. January 21st, National Hugging Day. January 22nd, Answer Your Cat's Questions Day, when you are supposed to ask yourself the questions your cat would ask, if it could talk. January 24th, National Compliments Day. And January 25th, National Beer Can Appreciation Day, which commemorates the first day in 1935 when beer was sold in cans in America. Who'da thunk it? So what are you going to talk about to celebrate this new year, to kick it off with a bang?
Well, on our Christmas vacation, I was sitting down doing some research for future stories, and I noticed that a lot of official explanations for things that people or mass gatherings that people have claimed to witness or experience are many times dismissed as mass hysteria.
Well, of course, it's an easy explanation.
So I found myself looking up mass hysteria, and I started clicking and reading and sifting through lots and lots of material. And hours later, I climbed back out of the rabbit hole with a story I completely happened to stumble upon. So I researched a little further, and I put it all together for my story tonight.
Oh, cool.
The Mad Gasser of Mattoon.
Oh.
No, ladies, it's not about any of your husbands or boyfriends, although I'm sure that the Mad Gasser label would appropriately describe some of them.
Nice.
So, who or what was the Mad Gasser of Mattoon? Well, sit back, relax, and I'll tell you all about it. Mattoon is a town in Illinois, but to really start at the beginning, we have to go to Virginia on December 22nd, 1933. It was a typical night in the Huffman home near Haymakertown. But around 10 p.m., Miss Huffman smelled a strange gas, which made her nauseated.
So Should I get all my strange gas smell jokes out of the way now?
Look, we've gone through this before. I can't control or be responsible for anything that happens while I'm sleeping. Just be glad it's under the covers.
Yeah, it doesn't help.
Well, I don't know what to tell you.
Carry on.
The smell disappeared, and she and her children went back to bed. But 30 minutes later, the strange odor reappeared. This time, Cal Huffman went to a neighbor's house and called the police. When they arrived, the police spent an hour trying to locate the source of the smell, but they couldn't, most likely because the smell had completely disappeared again. They left around midnight. At 1 a.m., the toxic odor returned. This time, all 8 family members were affected. They experienced nausea, headaches, and trouble breathing. A doctor was called in and had to give 20-year-old Alice Huffman artificial respiration to help her breathe.
That was one strong, powerful gas. Okay, no more, I promise.
Cal was convinced someone had attacked his home after a neighbor claimed to have seen a shadowy figure lurking outside their home, and they discovered a woman's footprint beneath a window. A doctor was able to rule out chloroform and tear gas, so as far as what the gas could be, no one knew. It would be strange enough if it was an isolated incident, but over the next 2 months, multiple families around Haymaker Town were attacked. On Christmas Eve, a family in Cloverdale returned home around 9 p.m. About 5 minutes after entering the home, the Hall family smelled a strange gas, and Mr. Hall was suddenly so weak that he began to stagger. His wife was able to drag him outside despite her own nausea. Mr. Hall experienced eye irritation for 2 days after. Dr. Breckenridge, the same physician who had called on the Huffmans, came to the Hall family's aid. He was able to get a whiff of the gas this time, saying it tasted sweet, like formaldehyde.
Oh.
Again, neighbors claimed to have seen a prowler near the residence, this time carrying a flashlight. Police noted that a nail had been pulled from one of the home's windows. Clarence Hall, concerned for his own family's safety, sent them to stay with friends, and he and a group of neighborhood men went out to search for this prowler. They didn't find anyone. 2 days later, the story hit the papers with the headline, "Gas attacks on homes continue," and dozens of other families found themselves under attack, often multiple ones on the same night. For example, on January 10th, 1934, Homer Hilton's neighbors claimed to have heard mumbling outside and someone trying to open windows right before Hilton's house was filled with gas. But over in Troutville, another home was similarly attacked that same night. With each report, and there were literally dozens of them, people claimed to see anywhere from 1 to 4 prowlers in their yards prior to a cloud of gas filling their homes. Or they would notice suspicious cars driving by and parking briefly. A woman's footprints were often found close to where these unfamiliar cars were parked. The Mad Gasser attacked 3 times on January 22nd in Carvin's Cove. Ed Reedy, Raymond Eder, and George C. Riley's home were hit. Eder's son claimed he saw a figure around the house, and Riley called his brother, who happened to be a police officer. The police quickly set up roadblocks, but they came up with nothing. At this point, citizens decided to take matters into their own hands, forming neighborhood watch groups, patrolling the streets, armed and ready. The New York Times got wind of the story, publishing an article with the headline, "Virginians are terrorized by gas thrower who flees in the night after making victims ill."
Jeez.
The very next day, the Virginia State Assembly passed a bill increasing the prison term for anyone releasing noxious gases to 10 years and up to 20 years if it caused injury. But that didn't seem to slow down the Mad Gasser. People all over the county were still catching glimpses of prowlers and experiencing noxious fumes in their homes. In some cases, the Mad Gasser returned multiple times to the same home if the homeowners scared off any prowlers the night before. The last reported attack was on February 3rd at the home of A.P. Skaggs. Police believe that Skaggs' home was the hardest hit, since the fumes caused the family to go into convulsions and hysterical shrieking.
Wow.
Because all the local papers had picked up the story, police began to wonder if it was all just a case of misidentified household fumes, overactive imaginations, and stress causing townfolks to cast suspicion on their neighbors just going about their business. The local papers then started printing headlines like, "Roanoke has no gasser," and the attack stopped, and no Mad Gasser was ever found. That might be the end of the story, except 11 years later in Mattoon, Illinois, it seems the Mad Gasser began striking again.
The same one?
I don't think that was ever determined.
Okay.
On the night of September 1st, 1944, Aline Kearney was home with her daughter. Her husband was out driving his taxi, so Aline's sister was at the Kearney's house to keep Aline company. When Eileen went to lay down with her daughter, she suddenly smelled a sickeningly sweet odor, and as it grew stronger, she suddenly felt paralyzed from the waist down. Aline called for her sister, who ran in and threw a window open. When police arrived, they found no signs of intrusion or even a prowler. But when Aline's husband returned from his shift, he claimed he saw a dark figure standing at their bedroom window in a suspicious manner.
That would be creepy.
That it would. The incident was written up in the paper under the headlines, "Miss Kearney and Daughter First Victims." And almost immediately, another man came forward saying his home had experienced a similar attack right before the Kearneys. Within days of the newspaper article coming out, 35 of the 16,000 residents of Mattoon began calling in with similar reports. They'd been sitting at home and suddenly smelled an odd, sweet perfume odor, before becoming overwhelmed by nausea, dizziness, vomiting, and even paralysis. On the night of September 5th, Carl and Beulah Cordes came home around 10 p.m. They went into the house, not noticing at first the white rectangle of cloth sitting on their porch next to their screen door. When Beulah did notice it and picked it up, she became violently ill. She said it was almost as if an electric shock went through her. Her face swelled and her mouth and throat burned. She began vomiting almost immediately as the feeling in her legs disappeared, as if she was paralyzed. She told the police that she believed the cloth was left on the porch to take down the family dog, because they also found a well-used skeleton key on the sidewalk near the porch and an almost empty tube of lipstick. When the cloth was analyzed by the experts, there was no evidence whatsoever of any chemicals on it.
Huh, that's weird.
Just like in Virginia, groups of concerned men began patrolling the streets, armed with pistols and shotguns, looking for the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. Some women even began carrying around bats and clubs when they left the house. And neighbors began staying over at each other's houses rather than sleep alone. Police suggested that people stop lingering in residential areas, and they asked for watch groups to disband out of concern for public safety. Mixed in with the 35 or so substantiated reports of Mad Gasser attacks were dozens of completely unconfirmed ones. 12 days later, the police issued a statement that the perfumey odor was simply a gas from the local diesel engine factory that was accidentally released into the air and carried on the breeze by natural wind shifts. It was the police department's official belief that the people of Mattoon were suffering from mass hysteria. Interestingly, once the police issued the statement, all reports, with just one exception, about Mad Gasser attacks completely stopped.
Huh.
The Mad Gasser of Mattoon, if he or she was an actual person or persons, was never found. Experts over the years have considered that the Mad Gasser incident was a case of mass hysteria. For one, most victims of mass hysteria are female, and since Mattoon had just as many men off fighting in World War II at the times as anywhere else, there would be a high percentage of females in town. Secondly, the symptoms described by victims are apparently common symptoms of mass hysteria, the paralysis, the nausea, etc. And thirdly, some psychologists who have studied the case point out that the very first headlines connected to the Mad Gasser, Miss Kearney and daughter first victims, implies that there will be more attacks, setting up already stressed people to expect more.
That's interesting that they even phrased it like that, saying Mrs. Kearney and daughter first victims.
Yeah, like they're expecting more.
Like they were expecting more. That's interesting.
Like they almost were the cause of the mass hysteria.
Right.
On the flip side, the company that was accused of accidentally releasing trichloroethylene into the air from the diesel engine factory provided a statement saying that they only had 5 gallons of solvent on site and that there was no way that such a small amount could have affected that many people across such a large area. So, like the Black Flash of Provincetown, the Mad Gasser of Mattoon, and Virginia for that matter, may go down in history as another unsolved case.
So that's interesting because while you were telling your story, I kept thinking about the Black Flash of Provincetown and how it was kind of similar, but it was around the same time period too. So I don't want to belittle what any of the victims thought they'd experienced, but that was a pretty high stress time for people.
That it was.
You know, I mean, they're in the middle of World War II. And so a lot of the men were gone, and it was, you know, they were worried that there were German U-boats off the coast, and it was a high-stress time.
And that's just all theory, so who really knows what happened?
Right. And I know I'm bad about remembering, so I'm going to say it right now. If you want to check out our sources and do some research yourself about tonight's stories, they are in our show notes.
Well, Beth, I guess that about wraps it up for this episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
I guess so. So we'll see you all next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon.
Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment on your favorite listening platform. It really helps us move up the list and become more visible on the podcast charts so new people can find us.
Thank you all for your continued support.
See you all next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.